Today we will be talking about hematopoiesis and role of bone marrow in that. The process of hematopoiesis means that the process by which the blood cells are made, right? Hematopoiesis means that the process by which we make RBCs, WBCs and platelets. That how we make red blood cells, white blood cells and platelets. Let's start with the very beginning, that from embryonic and fetal life. The first of all, the cells which make, okay, this is yolk sac, right? And in the fetal life, or rather embryonic life, very early life, the cells which are responsible to make to do the function of hematopoiesis, they first of all appear in the yolk sac, right? In the yolk sac around third week of gestation, third week of embryonic life. In the yolk sac, certain stem cells appear, and these stem cells, when they multiply, they lead to the formation of RBCs, WBCs and platelet. But we should define what is stem cell. Stem cell is any cell that when it multiplies, during multiplication, for example, if this is a stem cell has a unique property that whenever it multiplies, right, it multiplies asymmetrically. That some of its cells will differentiate along the mature, well-differentiated products. These are the well-differentiated products. And when it first time multiply, it asymmetrically multiply. One group will go towards differentiation, other group will be responsible to maintain its own population, right? That whenever a stem cell multiplies, right, some of its products will go and differentiate into mature cells, but some of its product cell, they will maintain its own population. That is why we say stem cells are those cells which maintain their own population or which have a property of self-renewal, For concept purpose, let me tell you that this is bone marrow stem cell, right? And let's suppose along the differentiation line, here is a cell which is called erythroblast. Is that right? Suppose it is erythroblast. Now, if you put erythroblast into a petri dish, into cell culture material, all erythroblasts are properly stimulated and provided with proper nutrients and stimulations, then all erythroblasts will eventually convert into RBCs and no erythroblast will be left at the end in the petri dish, right? So it means erythroblasts have a capacity to multiply and eventually they convert into mature RBCs, but they cannot maintain their own population. But in another petri dish, in a cell culture dish, if you put a stem cell, right? Stem cell will, if you are properly stimulating the stem cells and you are giving growth, you can say colony stimulating factors, right? Stem cell will not only provide the mature product at the end, but it will always maintain its own population, right? So again, let me repeat, what is stem cell? Stem cell is any cell which is capable of asymmetrically dividing. One group will go towards production of well-differentiated product and other group is responsible to maintain the original population of stem cells. Is that right? Now let's go back. The hematopoietic stem cell first of all appear in the yolk sac, right, and around the third week. And from here, these cells may migrate, and of course, these cells will migrate to other part of, you can say, embryo, and they will, especially as time will pass by, these cells are going to migrate to liver, these stem cells, hematopoietic stem cells, and to the spleen and to the bone marrow. But another point which I want to highlight, that these stem cells also take origin in aorta, mesoderm of aorta. They also take origin in mesoderm of gonads, and they also take origin in mesoderm of mesonephrons, right? So what we have learned, that stem cells responsible for hematopoiesis, that is formation of RBCs, WBCs and platelets, first of all appear in the yolk sac, but they also appear in mesoderm of aorta, mesoderm of gonads and mesoderm related with the mesonephron, right. These stem cells eventually transfer to the liver of the fetus, right, around 3rd month. These stem cells from aorta, from gonads and from mesonephron and of course from the yolk sac, these stem cells around 3rd month, right. It's too easy to remember that in the yolk sac this is 3 weeks and they appear into liver in 3 months. Is that right? Yolk sac 3 weeks, liver 3 months, right. So then liver get populated with these stem cells and now liver will become the major organ for hematopoiesis. It means in the fetus around the 3rd month of fetal life, right, RBCs, WBCs and platelets are mainly produced by the liver and some of the stem cells may even go to the spleen and some even may go to the lymph nodes. So what we really see that even though dominant hematopoiesis is going on in the liver, but some hematopoiesis is also going in spleen and lymph nodes as well, right. Now, this process continues, right, in these organs up to the very early, just before the birth, right. This liver will stop producing hematopoietic activity, right. So, actually why it will stop? Because somewhere around 4th month of fetal life, right, this is suppose your bone, vertebral column and sacrum, right, from here, especially from the liver and lymph node and from the spleen, these stem cells will start migrating around 4 months of fetal life to bone marrow, right. This is 4th month. So we can say on 4th month, right, these cells will appear 4 months of fetal life. These hematopoietic stem cells will appear in bone marrow and hematopoiesis will start also in the bone marrow, right. And by the time baby takes birth, right, in a full-term baby, right, almost all hematopoiesis is going on in the baby's bone marrow and just before the birth, liver has stopped its hematopoietic function and there is of course by the time of birth, there is no significant hematopoiesis in the liver, there is no hematopoiesis in lymph node, there is no hematopoiesis in spleen, all the hematopoiesis is going on in newborn's bone marrow, right. Again, let's recap. In case of, yes, first of all, what is hematopoiesis? Hematopoiesis is the process of making blood cells like RBCs, WBCs and platelets from the hematopoietic stem cells, right. Hematopoietic stem cells first of all appear in yolk sac during intragestational life around 3rd week and as well as hematopoietic stem cells also appear in aorta, mesoderm of aorta, gonads and mesonephron. These stem cells shift to the liver around 3rd month, right, and from 3rd month, right, liver start hematopoiesis mainly, a little bit hematopoiesis also starts in spleen and lymph nodes. Liver continues hematopoiesis up to the near the time of birth, right, but around the 4th month of fetal life, hematopoietic stem cells shift to migrate to the bone marrow. Bone marrow becomes their permanent resident for the future, right, and in the bone marrow, these stem cells populate well, they proliferate well and from there they release their mature product like RBCs, WBCs and platelets into circulation. Is it clear to everyone? Now, at the time of birth in a full-term baby, right, almost all hematopoiesis must be limited to bone marrow and all the bone marrow in the newborn is active. And you know, active bone marrow is called red bone marrow. Inactive bone marrow is called yellow bone marrow. What is the difference in red bone marrow and yellow bone marrow? Red bone marrow is active bone marrow, right? And yellow bone marrow is, yes, yellow bone marrow is inactive bone marrow. Why it is yellow? The reason being, when bone marrow become inactive, right, then in such bone marrow which is inactive, it is populated with lot of fat cells, right, and hematopoietic cells are very less. Due to that reason, this bone marrow looks yellow colored, right. Opposite to that, active bone marrow, the bone marrow which is actively involved in hematopoietic process, right, that bone marrow is highly vascular. That bone marrow has a lot of hematopoietic cells, and that is why I mean all the stem cells, and there are progenitor cells, and there are many cells which are passing through different developmental stages of formation of RBCs, WBCs and platelets. So they make the bone marrow red. When newborn baby is born, all the bone marrow is red. Then what happens? As age increases, right, red bone marrow you can say remains active only in the membranous bones. Let me tell you, first of all, that by the time of birth, right, full term baby, full term infant, right, all bone marrow is red. This is point number one. Secondly, in a full term newborn baby, if you find that there is extramedullary hematopoiesis, right, this should be considered abnormal. Now, what is the concept of extramedullary hematopoiesis? Extramedullary hematopoiesis means hematopoiesis going on outside the bone marrow. For example, if there is a full term newborn baby, infant, and hematopoiesis is going on in liver and spleen in big amount, it means this is an abnormality. Is that right? But in premature babies, the babies which take birth before time, the premature infant, they may have some significant hematopoietic activity in their liver. Now, after this, right, yolk sac 3 week, hematopoiesis start in the liver around 3 months of intrafetal life. Hematopoiesis starts in the, what is this, bone marrow around 4th month, and liver and bone marrow, both of them keep on doing hematopoiesis, right, until just before the birth, right, liver stops hematopoiesis, and then hematopoietic function is left only on the bone marrow, and all the bone marrow is red in newborn. Then what happens, that even though newborn has up to puberty, right, almost all bone marrow is, almost all bone marrow is red. Is that right? It means it is hematopoietically active. Is that right? But after that, what really happens, that hematopoiesis stops in the long bone and peripheral bones, and around the age of 18 and 20, hematopoiesis is limited to central or axial skeleton plus, right, plus hematopoiesis is, axial skeleton means lot of membranous bones, right, and plus the ends of, proximal ends of, yes, humerus and femur, right. So this area is having the red bone marrow. Now let me tell you what is axial skeleton. Axial skeleton mean, or membranous bones means that hematopoiesis is going on in the central bones. For example, in an adult after the age of 20, hematopoiesis is limited to skull bones, limited to the vertebral column, limited to the sacrum, and also present in the ribs, is that right, and hip bones. And hematopoiesis is present in an adult only in the proximal ends of the long bones like humeri and femori. Is that right? So the bone marrow which is present in remaining bones, that is now yellow bone marrow, right? bone marrow in remaining bone marrow in remaining bones is yellow bone marrow. Yellow bone marrow means inactive bone marrow. Now the point which you need to remember is that in a person who is more than 20 years or adult, right, there's 50% bone marrow is inactive and yellow, and 50% bone marrow is, yes, active and red. Is that right? So what we really learn? We learn that hematopoietic activity remains, you can say, limited in adult only in the axial skeleton and ends of the long bones. Is that right? Especially the proximal ends, right? Remaining bone marrow convert into what type of bone marrow? Yellow bone marrow. But one point is very important. If there is need of excessive hematopoietic activity, then yellow bone marrow has a capacity to be reactivated and it may convert into red bone marrow. For example, in severe hemolysis. In severe hemolysis, what really happens, RBCs are very rapidly being destroyed. When RBCs are very rapidly being destroyed, then the bone marrow, which is red bone marrow, which is present in the axial skeleton and membranous bones and ends of the long bones, all that red bone marrow may not be able to produce enough RBCs so that it can compensate for rapid destruction of RBCs. Under these circumstances, what really happens, if there is very severe hemolysis, there is very shortened lifespan of RBCs, RBCs are being lost at a very, very rapid rate, then what really happens that red bone marrow start converting into, yellow bone marrow start converting into red bone marrow, and we say that there is a process of expansion of red bone marrow. There is a process of expansion of red bone marrow. One clinical point here, that when there is excessive erythropoiesis, right, and bone marrow expands all over the body, it also expands within the skull, right, and in the skull, if red bone marrow expands too much, right, and you take X-ray, the ends of the then bones end look, okay, let me explain exactly how they look. Let's suppose this is the outer table of the skull and this is the inner table of the skull, and these are the trabeculi, and here is red bone marrow. Here is red bone marrow normally. Now what really happens? If someone has too much hemolysis going on in the body and the red bone marrow need to be expanded, right, then what really happens, that red bone marrow will expand into these areas, right, and when it will expand and outer table will become thinner, right, on X-ray you will find that outer table is not very visible radiologically, and it looks only like this on X-ray, that these spicules are very prominent, and radiological appearance, because this area is not very visible, so radiological appearance is like hair on end appearance. We call it hair on end appearance. So hair on end appearance is a radiological appearance seen in those person's X-rays, skull X-rays, where red bone marrow is expanding very rapidly, right? So this is one manifestation. Secondly, another important thing, that when bone marrow is doing its best to produce erythropoiesis, right? For example, if all the bone marrow cells are normal, all the growth factors are available, all the nutritional support is available, then bone marrow can increase its RBC production 8 to 10 times as compared to the normal speed. Is that right? So it means bone marrow has a great reserve function, that if there is need, it can increase its erythropoietic activity or hematopoietic activity significantly, right? Another, bone marrow is a large organ. Bone marrow is one of the largest organ in the body, and in size and weight, it is almost equal to the liver, right? In size and weight, it is almost equal to the liver, right? And now we'll come into detail of hematopoiesis. Now we shall be discussing about hematopoiesis in bone marrow and how the finished products are eventually going to peripheral circulation. Hematopoiesis in the bone marrow start with the stem cell, right? This first stem cell, right? This stem cell is called the first generation stem cell. This is called pluripotent stem cell. What is it called? Pluripotent stem cell of bone marrow. Now let me tell you, what is the concept of pluripotent? Stem cells are so many types. Some are called totipotent stem cell. The most wonderful totipotent stem cell mean that stem cell has a capacity to convert total tissue of the body, right? These cells are not totipotent. They cannot make all the tissue of the body, but we call them pluripotent stem cells. That these stem cells have a capacity, or they have a potential, or they have a potency to convert into many tissues of many different type of cells, hematopoietic cells, and surprisingly, we'll see it later in our discussion, they also can be converted, if appropriately stimulated, into non-hematopoietic cells, right? So this stem cell is called pluripotent stem cell. Pluripotent stem cell means a type of a stem cell which have a potency or which have a capability to produce, you can say, many different type of tissue cells, right? Now, this pluripotent stem cell, it basically divides into two different type of cells, right? And one cell is called, now these two different cells which are resulting from pluripotent stem cell, these are number one related with the lymphoid lineage, and this is also called multipotent stem cell related with the lymphoid system, and this is multipotent stem cell related with the myeloid system, right? And again, this was pluripotent, and these two cells are multipotent stem cells, right? That was pluripotent. These are multipotent stem cells. So I will write it here that multipotent bone marrow stem cell. And this particular stem cell, these two both are multipotent, and this blue one is called common lymphoid stem cell because it is origin of the lymphoid cells, right? So we call it common, yes, common lymphoid stem cell, common lymphoid stem cell. And this one, this is called, yes, what should be its name? This is for the myeloid cells, right? And myeloid cells mean all the blood cells other than all the bone marrow and the blood cells other than the lymphoid system is called myeloid system. What is myeloid system? Myeloid system mean bone marrow, myeloid system mean bone marrow plus all the cells produced by the bone marrow other than lymphocytes, because lymphocytes are included in the compartment of lymphoid system. Now, this was common lymphoid stem cell, and this is common, yes, common myeloid stem cell, myeloid stem cell. So what we can say that in the bone marrow there are pluripotent stem cells, and when they are appropriately stimulated with the certain growth factors, and right, they can divide into common myeloid stem cells or common lymphoid stem cells, and these two cells are not pluripotent, now they are called multipotent. These multipotent stem cells will further divide into cells which are called committed stem cells. They will divide into further cells which are called committed stem cells. For example, here there are 3 stem cells, and these 3 stem cells are called committed stem cells because these stem cells are now committed to produce a unique line of mature cells, but still they are stem cells, because whenever this cell will multiply, not only it will produce a mature product for the blood, but it will maintain its own population as well. It will maintain its own population as well. But because they are committed to produce a special type of mature product in the blood, so we call these stem cells committed stem cells. These committed stem cells are pro-T stem cells, okay, pro-T stem cell. This is pro-B stem cell, and here it is pro-natural killer stem cell. So now what has happened, that common lymphoid stem cell has divided into three types of stem cells, and these stem cells are not pluripotent. These three stem cells are not pluripotent, they are not multipotent, they are committed stem cells. What are they called? Committed stem cells. So let me write it here, that these are committed stem cells. These are multipotent stem cell, and these are pluripotent stem cells. So pluripotent stem cell divide into multipotent stem cells. Multipotent stem cells can divide into committed stem cells. Now I have made the committed stem cells which are derived from the common lymphoid stem cell. Now these are pro-natural killer cells, and these committed cells will eventually go into peripheral circulation. Of course, these committed cells will be pro-natural killer cells will multiply, then they will differentiate, and eventually they will appear into peripheral circulation. And when they will appear into peripheral circulation, now they are called natural killer cells. What are they called? Natural killer cells. This is a very special type of lymphocytes which are not B lymphocytes, which are not T lymphocytes, because they do not have the marker of B lymphocyte, they do not have the markers of T lymphocytes. Is that right? You know, B lymphocyte is having CD90 and CD20 proteins. These are not having CD19, these are not having CD20, it means they are not B cells. And like T cells, you know, T cells are having CD3. But these natural killer cells do not have CD3 proteins, so they are not even T cells. So they are not B cells, not T cells. Then we come to pro-T cells. Pro-T cells also start giving, they differentiate along cells. Eventually, the premature cells, which are derivative of pro-T cells, they go into peripheral circulation and they get mature into thymus. They get, you can say, mature into, they are trained into thymus. So these naive T cells, they will go into thymus, and in the thymus they will be trained, and after maturity they come back into, circulation, and now they are T lymphocytes. What are they? They are T lymphocytes, right? So we can say that from the, you can say, thymus, these are the T lymphocytes which come out, and these T lymphocytes which come out of thymus, these are called CD3, they have a unique protein on the surface which is called CD3. So these are CD3 positive cells. T cells are CD3 positive cells. These T cells are divided into two types of cells. Some T cells are CD4 positive, and some are, of course, this is CD3 as well as CD4 positive, and other T cells which are CD3 as well as CD8 positive, right? These which are CD4 positive, these are called T helper naive, and these are called T cytotoxic. We will discuss into detail in immunology, but again let me repeat it, that from the bone marrow there is pluripotent stem cell which can divide into common lymphoid stem cell. From the common lymphoid stem cell we can get the pro-T stem cells. These pro-T cells make the immature T cells. When they will go into thymus, they will be trained there. Actually, once they are trained into thymus, because thymus help the T cell to express the T cell receptors as well as help the T cell to express CD4 proteins or CD8 proteins. Is that right? So we can say T cells really get mature into thymus, or functional after getting training into thymus. Once they come out of thymus, right, these T cells can be, all T cells should have a CD3 protein. So one of the hallmark protein which determine that particular cell, particular lymphocyte is T cell or not T cell, it depends on it is having CD3 molecule or not. Now all the T cells have CD3 molecule, but some of the T cells in addition to CD3 molecule also have CD4, and other in addition to CD3 molecule have also CD8. Is that right? Now what really happens that when CD3 and CD8 both are present, these are called CD8 positive T cells. CD8 positive T cells, we will talk in future in immunology that these cells act as, yes, these cells act as cytotoxic cells, CD8 positive cells. But CD4 positive cells, right, these can divide into two types of cells. CD4 positive cells can divide into two types of cells, right, T helper 2 and T helper 1. Is that right? The major function of T helper 2 is that T helper 2 can stimulate the B cells and convert the B cell into, yes, what is it? Plasma cells. They convert into plasma cells. So B cell can be acted upon by the cytokines produced by T helper 2 and convert into plasma cell. And later on we'll see the function of T helper 1 is that it can convert monocytes or macrophages into highly active macrophages. Is that right? T helper 1, right? They can produce the chemical mediators or cytokines which can stimulate the macrophages, especially these T helper 1 are master in producing interferon gamma and tumor necrotic factor, and T helper 2 are master in producing interleukin 4 and interleukin 5. Again, let me repeat it because it's worth repeating that these natural killer stem cell, they produce the product which are natural killer cell, which are not T cells, which are not B cells. Pro-T stem cells produce the product which will be trained in thymus, and after the thymic training, these cells come out as T cells. These all T cells are CD3 positive, and some of them are in addition to CD3, CD4 positive, which are called T helper cells. Some of them in addition to CD3 are CD8 positive also, which are called T cytotoxic cells. Now T helper cell have to help some immune component to function better. Now what we really see that these T helper cells, right, some of them convert into T helper 2, others convert into T helper 1. T helper 2 cell can produce interleukin 4 and 5. Interleukin 4 act as B cell growth factor. Interleukin 5 work as B cell differentiation factor. Again, interleukin 4 produced by the T helper 2 act as, interleukin 4 work as B cell growth factor, and interleukin 5 work as B cell, yes, differentiation factor. So interleukin 4 and 5 which are produced by T helper 2 help the B cell to convert into plasma cell. What are plasma cells? Of course, active B cells which are actively producing, yes, antibodies, which are actively producing antibodies. Then we can talk about T helper 1 cells. They are not going to help the B cells, they are going to help the monocytes and macrophages, and T helper 1 produce gamma interferons and tumor necrotic factors especially, and they act on the, what is this, monocyte, and convert the monocyte into active macrophages. Even they can convert the monocytes or macrophages into epithelioid cells, or they can convert them into giant cells. And you must be knowing that activated macrophages and epithelioid cells, which are modified macrophages, or giant cells which are produced by the fusion of epithelioid cells, right? All these cells are produced by the action of gamma interferon and tumor necrotic factor on the macrophages. Again, let me repeat it. Macrophages, when they acted upon by the lower level of gamma interferon, they convert into superactive macrophages. But when they are activated with more higher level of gamma interferon, these superactive macrophages can be converted into epithelioid cells which are found in the granulomas. And if there is too much high level of gamma interferon, then some of the epithelioid cells fuse together and they convert into giant cells. So in TB granuloma, you may find activated macrophages, epithelioid cells, and what is this? Giant cell, and of course with a collar of lymphocytes which are converting monocytes into these cells. So we can say T helper 1 can help the granuloma formation, T helper 2 can help an antibody formation. That is why T helper 2 is helping the humoral immunity and T helper 1 is helping the cellular immunity, and T cytotoxic is also the part of cellular immunity. Now we come to pro B cells. These pro B cells, when these are activated, right, they mature into bone marrow and they are converted into B cells. But already we have seen that when these B cells are acted upon by the T helper 2, they can convert into, what is this? Plasma cells and produce the antibodies. So this was very briefly about the lymphoid cell production. Now we can come to the products coming from the common myeloid stem cell. The products which are coming from common myeloid stem cell. Actually, myeloid stem cell divide into, as you know, you have seen lymphoid stem cell, this divides into how many types? 3 types of cells, right? In the same way, myeloid stem cell can also divide into 3 types of stem cells. And all these 3 should be considered, yes, committed type of stem cell, right? Again, let me repeat it because it's worth repeating that common myeloid stem cell will divide into 3 types of committed stem cell, because these were pluripotent stem cell, then they were multipotent stem cell, then they were committed stem cells, because they have made a commitment to produce certain types of cells. But this cell was not committed. Is that right? Now, these are the committed stem cells, and we have to see what type of commitments they have made, what type of finished products they have committed to produce, right? First of all, this committed cell, this cell is also called colony forming unit, right? This committed stem cells are also called colony forming unit, because if this you take this particular committed stem cell, put into a culture dish, is that right? Cell culture dish, they will produce a colony of special type of differentiated product, right? They will produce a colony of special type of differentiated product. So we also call it colony forming units, right? First is erythroid megakaryoid basophilic. This is erythroid megakaryoid and basophilic, right? Erythroid, megakaryoid and basophilic. What does it mean? That this cell has a potential to go into cells, you can say go into morphologically recognizable precursors of 3 types. It can make a product here, right? This is morphologically recognizable precursor cell for the erythroid series, and it is called erythroblast, right? And this is megakaryoblast, and this is basoblast. Is that right? Now, so what has happened? That this was your committed stem cells. These committed stem cells have been converted, this one particularly, right, which is a derivative of common myeloid stem cell. This is called erythroid megakaryoid basophilic committed stem cell, or simply call it colony forming unit. It will make number 1 colony forming unit basophil. This is called colony forming unit basophils, right? This is colony forming unit megakaryoid system, and this is colony forming unit erythroid system, right? Later on in detail we will discuss, especially when we talk about erythropoiesis, that this cell, which is erythroid colony forming unit will convert into erythroblast. What is this? Erythroblast, right? And this is converted into megakaryoblast, right? Megakaryoblast, and this will convert into this colony forming unit into blast cell, which will produce basophils, and eventually, of course, you know, erythroblast will pass through early normoblast, intermediate normoblast, normocyte, late normocyte, and reticulocyte. But passing through all these stages, which we'll discuss later, right? Especially when we will be talking about certain types of anemias, we'll talk about this erythroid blast cells, how it work, right? Or erythroblast cell. So it will eventually produce fresh RBC, which is also called reticulocyte, and which will eventually convert into mature RBC. This is mature RBC. The point which you need to note here, that this mature RBC is a product of common myeloid system, right? That common myeloid stem cell convert into erythroid, megakaryoid, basophilic, right? Committed stem cells, and these committed stem cells may go into erythroid blast forming units or colony forming units or megakaryoid colony forming unit and basophilic colony forming unit. Then this erythroid colony forming unit, they will undergo the effect of erythropoietin. They will produce a lot of erythroblasts. Then erythroblast will is basically along this line. It is the first morphologically recognizable, right, precursor cell for erythropoiesis. This is morphologically recognizable precursor cell for megakaryopoiesis or platelets. This is morphologically recognizable precursor cell for the basophils, right? And eventually this will be producing what? We will discuss into detail that this will be producing platelets. This will be producing platelets. Please remember, platelet size is normally 1 to 2 microns, but RBC size is 7 to 8 microns. So we can say one RBC can accommodate 7 to 8 platelets, right? Platelet size is 1 to 2 microns, and they look like bluish color, but RBCs, of course, everyone knows, they look like pink color or red color. Then these are the basophils. Basophils are, when they are released into circulation, they are in very small number, and these basophils have, you can say, blue granules. These are granulocytes, right? And they have, because they have blue granules, blue staining granules, so they are called basophil. Very important point related with the basophil is that on the surface of basophils, they are receptor for Fc portion of IgE. So basophils are cells which are similar in many aspects. Basophils are the cells which are very, very similar with the mast cells, right? You should focus on, when I am pointing my finger, it means that you should stay here. Now, these basophils, right, these basophils are what? These are loaded with the IgE. But here I remember, I should mention something extremely important, that these pluripotent stem cells are also responsible for production of mast cells. Mast cells. Mast cells are also derivative of bone marrow. Mast cells are also derivative of bone marrow, right? And these mast cells are present in all the connective tissue in the body. These mast cells are present into all connective tissue all over the body, and mast cells are specially concentrated under the skin, under the mucosal linings, and it is specially concentrated in the connective tissue around the blood vessels and around the neurons. So we can say mast cells, the connective tissue cells, which are derivative of, yes, these are derivative of bone marrow stem cells, and mast cells are specially concentrated under the epithelial linings in the body and in perivascular connective tissue and perineural connective tissue. Very important point about the mast cells are they are like sisters of basophils, because like basophils, they also carry the Fc receptor for Fc portion of IgE, and they also play a role in type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. It's worth repeating again. Mast cell is a derivative of bone marrow. Mast cell is a derivative of bone marrow, right? Then, right, so we were talking about erythroid, megakaryoid and basophilic committed stem cell. Is that right? And these cells are producing erythroid derivative, which are RBCs, megakaryoid derivatives, which are your platelets, and they also produce the basophils. But whenever we talk about basophils, we should remember the sisters of basophils, which are permanently settled into connective tissue. But basophils are the sisters which keep on moving into circulation, and mast cells are the sisterly cells which are settled in peripheral connective tissue. But both of them have receptors for Fc portion of IgE antibodies. Now we come to the next committed precursor cell, right? Next committed stem cell, and the next committed stem cell is committed to make this colony forming unit. We call it colony forming unit GM. GM does not stand for general motor, it is for granulocyte and monocyte, right? So what really happens, it will divide into two types of morphologically recognizable precursor cell. Is that right? One cell will go along colony forming unit of monocyte, other is colony forming unit for granulocyte. And this granulocyte, as we will talk later, that these cells, right, these are again committed. What are these? These are the precursor cells. This whole line is precursor cells, morphologically recognizable precursor cells. Please remember, these are not stem cells. It means if you take one of this cell into a culture, cell culture, all of them, if they are properly stimulated and supported, they will convert into RBC and original cell will disappear. Is that right? So they are not considered stem cell. None of them is stem cell. They do not have the capacity of stem cell, that while producing the well differentiated product, they cannot maintain their own population. Is that right? So these are called what cells? These cells are called morphologically recognizable precursor cells, right? Of these precursor cell, colony forming unit for granulocyte, of course it will pass through promyeloblast, then it will pass through myeloblast, then myelocyte, and eventually it will convert into, yes please, you must be knowing, into what is this cell? This is neutrophil. And please remember, neutrophil is also granulocyte. It has recognizable and easily stainable granules, but some of its granules are red. In neutrophil, some of the granules are red and some of the granules are stained blue, right? So we can say basophil have granules which are all blue, but neutrophil have granules red and blue both. And then we come to this color. Okay, first we finish this one, then we'll come to the monocyte. This last committed cell in the myeloid series, is that right? This is basically a colony forming unit for eosinophils. This is colony forming unit for eosinophils, right? And they eventually produce the recognizable precursor cell, and when this cell will, of course, what is this called? This is called colony forming unit for eosinophils. Okay, corrected. This is not colony forming unit. This is basically eosinophiloblast. Eosinoblast. Is that right? So, what is happening? This was colony forming unit of eosinophil, right? And this is eosinophiloblast, and this eosinophiloblast will eventually give rise to a cell, and this cell, when it will come into blood, this is called, yes please, this has bilobed nucleus, right? And this cell has lot of eosinophilic granules, that is red granules, right? So this is called eosinophils. And you must be remembering, eosinophils also play a role in type 1 hypersensitivity, and eosinophils also play a role in parasitic infections. The number goes up, right? So this was about eosinophiloblast, right? And of course, these colony forming unit again come back. Colony forming unit erythroid go into erythroblast. Colony forming unit for megakaryoid system make megakaryoblast. Colony forming unit for basophilic make basophiloblast, which eventually convert into basophil. Then colony forming unit into granulocyte convert into myeloblast. What is this here? Yes, this is myeloblast, right? And this cell, this will convert into a cell which is called monoblast. What is it? Monoblast. This monoblast will eventually come into circulation as monocyte, right? Monocytes. These are monocytes. Now it means that all the blood cells are derivative of bone marrow. First of all, lymphoid cells like natural killer cells, T cells and B cells, right? Then myeloid cells. Myeloid cells are erythrocytes, platelets, basophils, which are granulocyte, neutrophils, which are granulocyte, and eosinophils, which are granulocyte. And non-granulocyte here is, what is this? Monocyte. Remember, monocytes also have granules, but they are not easily stained like other granulocyte. So that is why they were initially thought to be agranulocyte, right? Now, these monocytes, when they are present into circulation, they are considered monocytes. But when they shift to the tissue, they are called macrophages. These monocytes, when they shift to the tissue, they are called macrophages. Under what circumstances monocytes shift to the tissues? Number one, some of the monocytes, they shift to the tissue under normal physiological conditions. And right? And there are other monocytes which shift to the tissue only when there is inflammation, right? And then these monocytes are called inflammatory macrophages. What are these called? Inflammation related macrophages. What are macrophages? These are monocytes which have shifted to the, what are inflammatory macrophages? These are the monocytes which are shifted from the circulation to the tissue during inflammatory process. Is that right? But some monocytes shift to the tissues as macrophages but under physiological conditions. Let me tell you some of the, okay, this is a very special discussion. Some of the monocytes shift to the central nervous system during early phase of development. And these monocytes which shift to the central nervous system during early development, they become permanent resident of central nervous system. These monocytes which are living into central nervous system, or these macrophages which are permanent resident of central nervous system, these are called microglia. These are called microglia. You know that this is one of the type of glial cells in central nervous system. These are called microglia. Then there are other cells which also, some of these cells, they shift to the liver. And when they shift to the liver, right, these cells are called, yes, Kupffer cells. Kupffer cells. So hepatic Kupffer cells are basically, you can say, permanently resident macrophages which are normally in the liver. Then in the lungs also, some monocytes or macrophages, they are normally present in alveoli of you can say pulmonary system, and they are eating up the dust particle and other particulate matter, and these are called alveolar macrophages. Now we have seen that macrophages which physiologically shift to the central nervous system and become permanent resident there, these are called microglia. And these cells which shift to the liver, they are called Kupffer cells. Similar cells which shift to the alveolar spaces, they are called alveolar macrophages. Then there are some of these cells which shift to the spleen and they shift to the lymph node. These are called dendritic cells. Dendritic cells or histiocytes. Then some of these cells, they shift to the kidney. Right, and when these macrophages shift to the kidney, they become permanent resident in renal tissue. You must be knowing their name, that when macrophages are normally present into renal tissue and permanently living over there as permanent resident of the kidney, not during inflammatory conditions but during physiological circumstances, these cells are given a special name. The special name is, yes, you must be knowing, the special name is mesangial cells. Mesangial cells. Then some of these cells, they are just lingering under the skin. Some of these cells, and these are called Langerhans cells. These are called Langerhans cells, right? They are present, yes, where? They are present under the skin. Langerhans cells. So, Langerhans cells are what? Tissue macrophages under the skin. Microglia are tissue macrophages permanently in the central nervous system. Kupffer cells are tissue macrophages in liver. Alveolomacrophages are tissue macrophages in alveoli. Dendritic cells or histiocytes are tissue macrophages in spleen and lymph nodes. Mesangial cells are tissue macrophages living in, yes, what is it? Renal tissue. And then we should not forget the bone, right? And some of, yeah, this is, let's suppose, your femur, right? Some of the monocytes are permanently resident into bone, and these are called osteoclast. These are called osteoclast, bone eating cells. So osteoclasts are just a special type of tissue macrophages which are specially settled on long-term basis into bones. Is that right? So these were some cells which I was telling you, which are derivative of bone marrow, stem cell, and present into peripheral circulation and different tissues. Let's take a break.